Welcome to Center for Integrated Robotics Research and Development. In this video, we will be making a DTMF based robot from our CIRRD robotics training kit, which has been provided for the same. So what is DTMF? Well, DTMF stands for Dual Tone Multi-Frequency. And to give you a brief idea of what that is, let's take the example of a mobile phone. So you've got numbers from 0 to 9, and you'll notice that when you press any of the buttons, it makes a certain sound. Well, every single number on your keypad is actually a combination of two frequencies, a high frequency and a low frequency. And it's that combination that gives you a distinct sound on each button. And that gives you a brief idea of what dual tone multi-frequency is. So in our DTMF robot, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make use of that. We're going to have one mobile phone on our robot as a receiver, and we'll have another mobile phone which will act as a transmitter. And the catch with the DTMF is that you'll be able to operate your robot from anywhere. You've got a huge amount of range as long as there's cellular network at both the areas where you're transmitting mobile phone and you're receiving mobile phone is. So now you've got an idea of how the DTMF robot works and what it does. Let's get started with opening our kit. First up in our kit, we have our development board. Now this development board is among the many that was designed and fabricated by the CIRRD research team, and it's been made specifically for this DTMF robot. So let's take a look at what it's got in it. First up, you'll notice we've got an aux cable. So what does this aux cable do? Well, we discussed in brief how our DTMF robot works. As I said before, we've got two mobile phones. We've got one that's going to be on the robot, which will be like a receiver, and one mobile phone which will work as a transmitter, which you can use from anywhere. So this aux cable will be connected to our receiving mobile phone, which will be on our DTMF robot. Now what happens then? Well, as we also discussed, dual tone multi-frequency, when you press any number on your mobile phone, a corresponding frequency is generated. Now that frequency passes through here and gets to our development board, and here we have a dedicated DTMF decoder. This one's model number is MT8870. So now what does that do? Well, when our frequency input comes into our development board, this decodes it and gives us a useful digital information output. So now that digital information is passed on to our microcontroller and is processed from there. So here let's look at the brain of our development board, which is the Arduino Nano. Now for those of you who are not too sure what an Arduino Nano is, to give you a brief idea, an Arduino Nano is an open source development board in itself. It has 14 digital output pins, 8 analog output pins. It essentially uses an Atmega 328 microcontroller, and basically it serves as an 8-bit microcontroller on your development board. So now let's move on to some of the other components. As you will notice, we've got two ports here. Those are to connect our motors, and here we have a dedicated motor driver IC, which is model number L293D, and that's what we'll be using to interface with our motors. And apart from that, you've got some components which you've already seen a lot, I'm sure. You've got a voltage regulator here. This is where we'll be connecting our battery supply, and this is a DC jack. Here you can connect and you can use it to charge a battery in case you're using rechargeable batteries on your robot. So that pretty much covers all you need to know about our development board for this robot. Let's move on to the next part. Next we'll notice this is the body of our robot. This will form the bottom and this will form the top, and these together provide the chassis inside which our robot will be housed. Next up, we've got the two motors that we'll be using for our DTMF robot. These are two BO motors, or battery operated motors. Now, to give you a brief idea of a battery operated motor, it's basically a motor that can rotate at a speed of about 60 rpm when operated at 9 volt. Next in our kit, we've got 2 wheels using which our robot will be mobile, or in other words, by mobile I mean it will be able to move up and down freely. We've got our battery. So, the battery that we will be using on this robot is an 8 volt 1 ampere hour battery, and this will be the power source for our DTMF robot. And next we have some of the smaller components in our kit. We have a caster wheel. A caster wheel helps us to achieve mobility in all directions. We have a few holders which we will be using to hold parts in place. We have screws, nuts and bolts, and we have spacers. We have 2 kinds of spacers in our kit. We have 1 inch spacers and 1/4 inch spacers. It will also be used in the assembly part to hold parts in place. And last up, we have a screwdriver just for screwing things in place and making it that much easier to build your robot. And that pretty much covers everything we've got in our box. So now let's move on to the assembly part of our DTMF robot.